Hi, I'm Charlie Melcher. Welcome to the FoST podcast. Paola Prestini is one of today's leading classical composers. In 2011, she was named one of the top 100 composers in the world by National Public Radio. Her work has been commissioned and performed by institutions including Carnegie Hall, the Kennedy Center, the New York Philharmonic, and the Los Angeles Philharmonic. Paola is also the co-founder and artistic director of National Sawdust, a nonprofit venue in Brooklyn, New York, established with the goal of providing composers and musicians across genres a setting where they're given support and critical resources to create and share their work. National Sawdust has featured artists such as Philip Glass, Yo-Yo Ma, David Byrne, amongst many others. Her recent opera, Sensorium X, embodies her commitment to innovation and accessibility. Developed in collaboration with NYU's Ability Lab, the work uses custom-designed AI tools to expand the expressive potential of voice for minimally verbal individuals, exploring the intersection of technology, disability, and the arts. Just recently, the opera was featured at the Royal Ballet and Opera's Shift Festival. In our conversation, Paola and I talk about her path from Juilliard, what it means to be an artistic entrepreneur, and how technology and classic arts can work together to create accessible and innovative stories. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Paola, welcome to the Future of Storytelling podcast. Such an honor to have you.
Thank you so much, Charlie. It's great to be here. Longtime fan.
Thank you. Feeling is mutual. So let me ask you, I've heard you say many times that you knew from a young age that you wanted to be a composer. How is that? What inspired you to want that career path?
That's such a great question. I think that from a young age, I knew I wanted to tell stories, and it just happened that it was music that was my language. And so pretty early on, I realized that I wasn't a performer, but that I loved music. I must have been 9 when I wrote my first song. And so from then, it became a very clear path. Like there was never a question.
And I'm just curious, what taught you that you weren't a performer?
So I think what taught me that I wasn't a performer was that I had a very rigorous mom, and she would make me practice several hours a day. She worked full time, and I had someone who helped me at home and who didn't know music. And so my mom would be like, "Was Paola practicing?" And she'd be like, "Oh, yeah, it's beautiful. And that worked until I had my first concert, and it was a total disaster, and it was Chopin.
Oh, no.
And it was really hard, and I totally biffed it in front of this entire audience. My mom was like, "What's happening? You've been practicing, 3 hours a day." And then I came clean, and I was like, "No, I haven't been practicing. I've been improvising." And this is really what I love. And then she was like, "Well, let's find you classes." And, she did. She found me a teacher. And yeah, that's the rest is history.
So from a young aspiring composer to go to Juilliard, that was an incredible move. What made you decide to go there, and what was that experience like?
I mean, actually, when I graduated from Interlochen, which was the arts academy that I went to high school for, I was actually discouraged to go to Juilliard. I was told I wouldn't get in, and so I didn't apply. And I think it's such an important thing for young artists just to realize that it's not your job to reject yourself. I needed someone to just say, "No, go get it." It's better to be rejected, but anyway, long story short, I ended up at Peabody, which was actually wonderful. And I was studying with somebody incredible who then passed away. And that's when I decided, I should just give this a chance. And I got in and moved to New York, and it's been my city ever since. And it was a really challenging experience. But at the same time, I met so many wonderful artists, and some of those artists are still in my life today. The person I co-founded Vision into Art with, which is my production company, is still a friend today. My husband I met there, who's still my husband. Incredible cellist Jeffrey Ziegler I met there. There's so many positive things in the sense that I also started really thinking about different disciplines and how to make them come together. I think of it often almost as if you're a jock, like what does it mean to do a sport at the most extreme level? And that's what it was like to be at Juilliard. It was this extraordinarily driving type of environment that forced you to constantly be thinking about what it meant to be at the top. And that kind of pressure and that kind of focus, I think, is still with me today.
It's one of the most sort of established, best known as one of the best places if you're a musical artist, and maybe kind of a traditional bastion of learning craft and skills and theory and all of that. What is the relationship between Juilliard for you and what you do now at National Sawdust? How different is those two institutions?
I mean, they couldn't be more different, in the sense that now I want to be honest that the Juilliard today is not the Juilliard that I attended. I went to school over 20 years ago, and at that time, there was really little asked of what you need in order to thrive. It was not the question. The question was, can you make it? And so I think that National Sawdust as an organization is very much a response to the things I would have needed, the care I would have needed, the questions I would have needed to help me thrive as an artist and a human. National Sawdust is still very much a evolving institution, and it's not perfect by any means. It's constantly shaped by the different needs of the artists that we're engaging with. And also, it's a very complex time, in the States to be running an institution like this during this administration with the values we have. So I have to say I'm very grateful for the team we have, the board we have, and also for the fact that artists seem to really love to perform here.
I'm just curious, what is it that you felt like you didn't get as a young person at Juilliard that an artist needs? What was missing that you're now able to try to offer at National Sawdust?
Well, I was the kind of artist that really thrived on interdisciplinarity. And so it didn't mean that I didn't respect the kind of craft that I needed to master, quote unquote. But it was that I drew my inspiration from extra musical things. So whether it be the political realities of the day or literature or theater or visual art, those were the kind of aspects that really inspired me. And when I was at Juilliard, it was considered a negative thing to want to do those things. Instead of allowing the creative mind to explore what the boundaries are, the boundaries were set for me. And then also just being a woman at a time when, there were very few women to look up to. They existed, they were there, but they weren't at Juilliard. There was just this feeling of an abyss of challenges. And so I was very fortunate because while I was there, I got this Paul and Daisy Soros Fellowship for New Americans. And that really took me out of the muck. It allowed me to really be surrounded by super inspiring people who were looking at the challenges in the world that were so big as immigrants, and looking at them through the lens of finding solutions. And so that all of a sudden was this great hook, if you will, that took me out and just allowed me to say, okay, this is maybe not going to be the area in which I thrive as a composer, but I can create my own context. And that's when I started the first nonprofit that still exists to this day called VisionIntoArt, which is a nonprofit dedicated to interdisciplinarity and social impact and my work and also my husband's work, Jeffrey Ziegler's work. So that has become a solve, if you will, and was a solve for sure during that time as a young artist.
And just for our listeners, in case they don't know, can you share your background and your experience as a immigrant to America?
Yeah, my mother and father and I immigrated when I was a child to the Mexican border. And that's where my father is till this day. It's a small town called Nogales. And then my mom and I left shortly after for Tucson, Arizona. Being an immigrant to this country and then going to the border, which is another point of entry, allowed me to really see the United States through a completely different lens. It was this lens of possibility and of inclusion. Border life is very different from anywhere else. It's a life that's very fluid and that's very, very obviously binational. And at the same time, Nogales, Sonora, which is across the line, is a place that's very challenging, both at the time in the 80s, the drug culture, and yet I lived it in a very positive way. I lived it crossing the line. I lived it in a very fluid way, and getting to know and understand the socioeconomic disparities in such a profound way through shared experiences, through people I loved, through just being able to cross the line and all of a sudden there was no running water, allowed me to kind of understand, if you will, like what it takes to try to not equalize, but try to create equity in all the ways that I can as a citizen. I didn't naturalize until I was 30. And, once I did, it was very clear that I was devoted to this country and that I wanted to be a functioning part of this democracy.
So let me ask you now about the act of composing, of creating. Do you have an image or is it sound? What are you seeing or hearing? I mean, does it start with a sensorial experience, or how does that work for you? How do you go about creating something?
Yeah, it's usually a point of inspiration. So whether it's a commission or whether I'm self-commissioning, which often happens as well, it's either something that I want to tackle as a topic, something that's an inspiration to me. Sometimes it's something that's given to me.
No one checks your books, colory boys. You'd best not be seen.
But generally, what happens first is a long period of gestation around thinking on a topic. And that can mean studying, reading, or quite frankly, I'll be walking and people will just think I'm kind of zoning out, but I'm really just processing sound and processing what a structure might look like. Then I sit down at the piano and I actually write everything out. And that process has never left me. It was how I learned how to write. And I think it's not that is necessary, but for me, it just creates a sense of physicality in my actual writing. And then from there, I put it into the computer. And that's a whole other level of revision and explosion, orchestration. And whether I'm writing an opera or a piece for one instrument or I'm writing electronics, it's all this kind of very ritual-based activity. Revision is my friend, so it's like I start with something that looks so spare and then eventually it becomes a world unto its own. And then it doesn't stop there because usually I'm writing for specific performers and what they bring to the table is a whole world of experience and nuance and improvisation. And so it's a very layered world.
Over hundreds recorded revolts, which occurred throughout the Caribbean and the Americas up until the late 19th century.
And it sounds like you really do think of it as telling a story.
Yeah, every piece requires a story. Sometimes it's more abstract, sometimes it's actual narrative storytelling. So it's really what serves the project. For example, Houses of Zodiac, it's a story that goes through different poems, and it's very abstract, and it talks about two people trying to find each other. It's told through Balanchine dance and buto and cello. And a lot of that story gets told in specific places, site-specific places. So we did it last at the cemetery. People had to come into the crypt and watch it and feel this expanse of these two characters trying to reach each other through the poetry of Anais Nin, Natasha Trethewey, and Brenda Shaughnessy. So, I like to try to surprise people with the way that we storytell, because I think that especially the way classical music is right now, we've lost so many people in terms of our audience. And so to me, it says that we need to do our part in terms of reaching people in new ways. And sometimes that means more creative approaches to music making. Sometimes it means more creative approaches to marketing. Sometimes it means the actual spaces you're in. So as a creative thinker and composer, but also as someone who presents work and thinks about production very deeply, that's how they intersect. And that's probably also the manifestation of why I created a space like National Sawdust.
First of all, just knowing some of the pieces and hearing you describe them, they are really immersive experiences, right?
Yes.
It's not just a ears-only experience. It's a full body experience. It's playing to the full body, I guess, really. I mean, if you're sitting in a cemetery, for example,
Yes.
there's some information your body's taking in that enhances and interacts with the music and the other parts of the performance. And of course, I say that just because my listeners know how much I am excited about immersive storytelling and telling stories to the whole body.
Exactly. And I love that you say that, because like the sensorial aspect of music and storytelling can't be, underplayed. Again, that to me is access. It means access to story, access to as many people as possible being able to see themselves in a story, whether it's a musical story or, whatever it is. And I think about that and take that responsibility really dearly.
So you mentioned your understanding of elements beyond the composing, like the producing, the bringing people and the understanding of where to put it on and all of that. And I know you've used the term entrepreneurialism, like that you consider that to be part of what it is to be an artist today, is to be able to not just be a creator, but also an entrepreneur. I wonder, is there something innately connected in your mind between composing and being an entrepreneur?
Well, I think for me, it's that I want things done a certain way, right? I want my work to be put out into the world a certain way. So perhaps there's an element of control that I like to retain and an element of ownership, if you will, over an experience. And I think that doesn't mean that I don't like to collaborate. And I think that's actually that kind of coalition building is necessary. But if I wasn't a producer, then, I probably wouldn't be thinking about the whole picture. And I always am. And I would say that all started out of necessity, but then it became a way of life. I guess it is entrepreneurship, but I see it as taking responsibility over what I put out into the world. I think that especially some of the work that I'm putting out into the world, I've seen the typical presenters not be super open to it. Like an example would be, Sensorium X, the opera that I'm doing at the intersection of disability and AI. There was such reticence to open people's arms to this idea, which I felt was so natural and needed and full of beauty. And so once I got so many no's, it was like, okay, well, that's fine. Then we just have to do it ourselves. And then from there, we created something that was really exceptional and groundbreaking.
So I want to come back to Sensorium X because I think it's such an original and incredible project. But tell me about some of the challenges as a young female composer of classical music, like trying to make her own way, to start her own company. Like what did you learn? What was a big challenge? What could you teach somebody else hoping to do something like that?
I mean, I wouldn't be lying if I wouldn't say that every step was a challenge. I mean, there was so many moments of self-doubt, right? It started as being at Juilliard and, being in a very kind of, notoriously misogynistic environment and needing to survive that and needing to survive that lack of safety, when you're 19, 20. Then there was the reality of, trying to fundraise when you're completely unknown. And I'll never forget, I was performing in basement churches and performing with this collective that I had formed. It was called VisionIntoArt. And we finally got this break to do something at PS 122, it was called at the time, which is now, I think, PS 1. And Philip Glass came. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I was in my late 20s and we'd been performing many years. And I was like, this is our break. Like, this is the moment that he's going to tell me that we're amazing. And I was so excited. And he came up to me and he said, listen, let's have breakfast tomorrow. He said, I want to talk to you. And I was like, okay, great. So I showed up and he said, that was terrible. And he was like, and I was like, wait, what do you mean? And he was like, you're so talented and you're carting around all these people and your work isn't done on yourself. He was like, fix yourself, fix the work. Maybe what I needed to be doing wasn't exactly a collective, but to be forming my production company. And what was hard about it too was that I did go on to found something even bigger, which was National Sawdust. And so in that moment, I had to say to myself, you are more than people will expect of you. And you will be a mother, and you will be a leader, and you will be a composer, and you will be the best at all of them. And you will have to show people that it's possible.
So tell us more about Sensorium X, and
Yeah.
for people who didn't have the pleasure of experiencing it, what it is.
Sure. Sensorium X is an opera, but the Sensorium project is a platform. And it really started with, the title, if you will. The word Sensorium X means at the seat of the senses. And it really stemmed from a beautiful libretto written by my friend Brenda Shaughnessy that explored the relationship between a mother and her nonverbal, non-ambulatory son. And it mirrors her own lived experience.
Is going into becoming only data.
This story essentially paints this dystopian tale where a corporation learns that what they need in order to create the perfect human is the very gene of this nonverbal child, that imperfection, if you will, would help perfect the data. And so this mother is forced with the question of how do you protect a child who, doesn't communicate in a verbal way? And so what began as just an opera became this extraordinary exploration into what does communication mean? What does it mean to have a voice?
I can see inside you.
And then the very deep question of, well, what do you do when you have a nonverbal character on stage? First of all, how do you find those characters? How do you make sure they're safe on stage? How do they actually communicate? And so this began one of the most rich, extraordinary, deep collaborations across fields that I've ever done. And so I reached out to my friend Luc Dubois, who is the head of engineering and music at NYU. And I said to him, I have this challenge. I need to find technology, and we need to create technology to help nonverbal folks on stage. And then we created an advisory board that was international that would teach us what does it mean to cast, what does it mean to audition, how do you hold rehearsal rooms, how do you create scores for singers who are blind, how do you work with deaf performers, what do you do with performers who have cerebral palsy? And it began a 7-year process that culminated last year in a field house in Omaha. And the person who ended up saying yes is now on my board. He's an amazing gentleman named Roger Weitz, who was on the board of Opera Omaha and who has a child himself who's autistic. And his wife is this amazing woman who has this festival called Common Senses, which foregrounds disability and performance through all different forms. And so they said, yes, you come out here, we'll perform this. And so my company, VisionIntoArt, partnered with Beth Morrison Projects, who's my long-term co-producer, to bring together this work, which is now going to the Royal Opera House next week.
That's amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Can you tell us about the technology you developed for it?
Sure. We worked with quite a few people. And, honestly, it was such an interesting conundrum because the spasticity as well is something that you're contending with of the performers. And so first, we created community sessions where we asked folks who use AAC devices, which are augmented communication devices, what do you want most if we're able to do this? And uniformly, it was, we want to sound like ourselves. We don't want to sound like a British 50-year-old man. We want to sound like ourselves. And for folks who were minimally verbal, that was one challenge. And folks who communicated without words at all, it was a different challenge. And so we paired with this gentleman named Eric Singer, who created these devices that are car sensors, essentially car crash sensors. So very reactive sensors. And then Luke essentially sampled the phonemes of the voice. And so with this technology, we were able to develop, essentially an AI that sounds like the voice of the person using it, and then through reactors that are very sensitive can be triggered on stage live. And that was extraordinary because one of our performers, we had 2 performers in the role of Kitsune, which is the nonverbal child, hadn't had access to his voice in the 21 years of his life. And so he uses a communication partner, and still that communication partner travels everywhere with him. But for him to be able to express himself freely on stage, saying these lines, completely unlocked a new life for him. In fact, he has a girlfriend now, and he's a performer, and that to me is the innovation, is both its application on stage, but also the way in which it's done is very unique and allows for there to be a real participation in the making of this technology and this in this art form.
And so each of these performers was able to help in a way to train or tone the voice, like so that it really was a reflection of their own spirit, of themselves.
Yeah. One of the performers, he communicates in animal sounds. And so we actually created a vocabulary of answers through his more gestural vocabulary and more nonverbal vocabulary that ended up being the script. So, this is a very bespoke process. This is a laborious process. This is something that involves a lot of different people, a lot of collaboration and cooperation. There were a lot of failures, we weren't perfect in it. And so I think, when you're doing something for the first time, you have to be okay with the fact that everyone's not going to be happy, that you are going to fall and you're going to make mistakes, and it's still worth it. Like, it's still worth it because something changes, and then the path forward can be easier.
And I imagine this has been, as you just said, incredibly transformative for the performers who were not used to having the opportunity to get on stage and perform.
Oh my gosh. Well, it was transformative for everybody. It was transformative for folks who didn't have experience with disability. They now see the world in a different way. And I think that this expansion of the way that we accept each other and our differences is the way forward. And it's also part of the reason why classical forms have dwindled, is that the exclusion, whether it's socioeconomic, whether it's access in terms of mobility, or lack of education in a specific field, it's like it creates a narrower point of entry, which only hurts the field and the form.
Like you, I've gotten just incredible joy and fulfillment from being able to collaborate with so many different kinds of storytellers and artists and creators. Anyway, I think we are all meant to be creators. I think we're all meant to be, to some degree, singing or dancing or playing an instrument and co-creating together.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that kind of attitude towards the arts is actually what we need in order to create a thriving society, right? Is that everyone's participating, collaborating, and listening. And at the root of great art making is great listening. So that's fundamentally why it's so healthy, for society.
Paola, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that this whole idea that the audience is passive, and we've grown up learning that, and we've consumed all of our stories as just voyeurs instead of participants, has created an expectation that we can't make a difference in the world, that we don't have agency. And I think it's just the opposite. If everyone could participate in their stories and have the possibility with their friends to create and be the hero and thrive in this experience, then they would show up in their real life and feel like they could have that level of agency, that they could make a difference in the world. And that's what we need for good society, good civil engagement, and just to solve the problems that we all face. So
exactly. We need each other.
Well, we need you very much, and we very much appreciate you, Paola, for all the extraordinary work that you do and all the ways that you have thought to give back and to see your art not just as a solo form of expression, but as a form of activism and education and contribution. So thank you for all of that.
We are very much on the same path. So it's very inspiring, to know that we're working towards the same goals.
Once again, I'm Charlie Melcher, and this has been the FoST podcast. My thanks to Paola Prestini for our conversation, and to you, our listeners, for tuning in today. Be sure to check out my book. It's called The Future of Storytelling: How Immersive Experiences Are Transforming Our World. It's available in stores and online wherever books are sold. And if you're looking for a community of creative leaders who are shaping cutting-edge storytelling today, please check out the FoST Explorers Club. You'll get access to exclusive speaker sessions, curated trips, and much more. You can find information about the FoST Explorers Club on our website at FoST.org. The FoST podcast is produced by Melcher Media in collaboration with our talented production partners, Charts and Leisure. I hope to see you again soon for another deep dive into the world of storytelling. Until then, please be safe, stay strong, and story on.